My name is Lucy Sharp. I am a sleep consultant. I call myself a sleep coach because I feel like it's slightly less formal. I like things to be, quite a relaxed conversation when we talk about sleep. It's often a high pressured subject, so it's nice to kind of just, you're not dealing with a consultant. We're going to help and we're going to coach and we're going to encourage your child to sleep happily. I'm based in Tring, and it's now 10 years since I set Days and Dreams up.
Oh, wow.
It's gone fast. It's gone really fast.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I know, I need to do like a birthday something. So it's really important for me that if I'm working with a family, it's about encouraging a child to feel safe, secure, and content around sleeping. And that is something that comes often with the encouragement of parents.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, I work with the parents to help everything become a lot easier. And there are many ways that we can do this, but
and that's what I love
not
about
crying.
I love about you because it's very individualized as well, isn't it? And you listen to kind of what people need in their situations and setups, which is really important when you're working with someone who's helping you and your family, because every family is so different in what we need. So we can go, thank you for that. We can go straight into questions. You're based in Tring, aren't you?
Based in Tring,
local people, but you do work online with people as well.
Yeah, I'm working with a family in Australia at the moment. So
are you?
All over the place, yeah.
Oh, I bet that's quite good in terms of like they're doing bedtime when you're in the day.
Exactly. It works well. They've just gone to bed and they've just gone to sleep. I'm like, well done. And then obviously if they've only wake ups that they're not finding easy, I can be there to support them that way. So so it's less naps, it's more night time.
Yeah.
It's around. Yeah.
So why don't we start on the good old layering thing, because I have a question from a lady who I'm supporting as a doula, actually, who was getting herself a bit worked up. She was like, they're trying to wrap up their baby so much, and then the baby wasn't sleeping. And I thought that would be quite a good topic to bring up with you, about how cool or warm a baby is and how that can affect their sleep.
It's so individual. So my two, I couldn't wait to swaddle them as tiny babies, and they were like, get me out of here, I don't want to be in this. And so I just had to be guided by them as far as sort of what they wanted, which again, I think we have to recognize that we can see those little signs even when our babies are tiny. And some people don't swaddle, and I'm like, have you tried swaddling? And they're like, oh no. And so I think there's that side. Heat wise, I mean, bedrooms ideally can be, should be kind of under 20 degrees and at the cooler side. Again, though, if you're
what would the minimum be then?
So I mean, it says 16, which is quite cold.
Yeah.
And then so often babies are cold.
Yes.
And we're led really not by the extremities, so not the hands and the feet. It's about feeling how their torso is, how warm they are on their torso. Their outside limbs and bits that aren't in the sleep bag. We try not to kind of be led by that too much, as to sort of how they're feeling with temperatures on their hands and feet, because quite often they are cold. But if they're sleeping well, their tummies are warm, you can feel that their torso is warm, their hands and feet are cold, then they're okay. If they're not sleeping and you feel that their hands and feet are cold and that's a contributing factor, then you can always put the little folds over on their baby grows and put socks on, and things that could help warm them up, and etch that room up a couple of degrees if you can as well, if you have that control. And if you don't, when my eldest was young, we were in a freezing cottage. Like it was, so I had to buy her a big warm sleep bag with arms and legs, but that's just, I mean, it was freezing. So I think it's very dependent on your space and how warm the room is, but try not to panic, because actually if they're sleeping well and yet you're worried that they feel cold but their torsos are warm, they're usually okay.
So if I was someone who's currently pregnant and trying to like buy the shopping list of things I need, what would you say would be a good thing to start with in terms of sleep equipment, hygiene for layering and clothing and that kind of thing?
I would say for a newborn now at this time of year, I would wear a long sleeved baby grow, no vest, and a 2.5 tog sleep bag.
Mm-hmm.
Moving forwards, as it gets warmer, reduce the long sleeves down to short sleeves and no legs. Stick with a 2.5 tog sleep bag. And then if it gets very hot, then we move on to the sheet bag, which is a 0.5 tog, which is just mainly a sheet rather than a big, thick sleep bag.
Yeah, it's more about comfort, I guess.
That is just providing them that security that they like to have when they're asleep, having something over them all the time rather than nothing. Some babies are fine not having anything. So again, it's a bit of trial and error sometimes when it comes to what they like to wear in bed and to be covered up or not. So see what your child likes. And if you're sensing, if your gut's telling you it's something, it usually is. So try not to panic by what you've read. Try to be led by how they seem.
Okay, that's good, like basics to try to start with, and then you can work out from there, can't you? What about this is one that always gets asked about newborn sleep and making sure you're setting yourself up for success, particularly when babies are clingy, in inverted commas in the newborn stage. And I'm talking like say 0 to maybe a month or 2 months, where they just want to be either on mum or a parent or on anyone. I think a lot of people get worried, don't they? They're setting them up for never being able to sleep off of them or not being able to go to sleep without them. How do you answer those sorts of questions?
In my newborn sleep guide, I tend to say, look, first 6 weeks, don't even think about anything to do with setting up bad habits. Don't even worry about, what's going to happen moving forwards in the future. Really, the first 4 months, it doesn't matter. Everything's changeable. Everything's adaptable. Our children are really adaptable and it's led by us. So if they're clinging, if they need you in those first few weeks, just go with it. It's really hard, I know, and you can be very sleep deprived because you're worrying about falling asleep with them on you. But hopefully you can share the load a bit with a partner, or even if a grandparent can come over and just, spend some time holding baby or doing the things that you can't do because you're having to hold the baby. But just try and ride that part out, because if it is feeling tough, it will only be made harder if you're stressing. So anything moving forward and anything in the future can be changed, and you're not setting bad habits when they're this young. It's not possible. They're too little. So normally around 6 weeks, I tend to say, look, if you can start putting them down a bit more, great, do it. And by 8 weeks, if you can start sort of creating a slightly darker environment for naps, if they're falling asleep sort of more independently, or, you're able to lie them down, you can make that little area, even if I remember putting an umbrella up once, just so it just kind of created this little dark hive in the corner of the room. It then means that they are getting more used to sort of, okay, when I'm asleep, it's darker, and when I'm awake, it's lighter. But again, if it doesn't work, if it doesn't happen, just doesn't matter. When sort of 16 weeks hits, if that you're really struggling, that's when we can start to really set a bit more of a routine. And then ideally around 6 months, kind of really implementing that and putting that into play.
Okay. Yeah, because it's tricky, isn't it? Because sometimes there could actually be an underlying thing going on, with them. But I think it's like, I would sometimes recommend go through the checklist. Have you seen perhaps a cranial osteopath or someone that's just checking that they're, they're kind of aligned and they're actually comfortable lying down, and or it could be the lactation consultant if you're breastfeeding, to make sure that they're latching properly, so not taking up too much wind. But at the end of the day, once you've kind of done all those checks, it could just be that it's the 4th trimester and they want to be with you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely think if you've ruled all those things out, that's when you can then sort of speak to me and be like, right, we've ruled everything out. Is this okay? And that's when that's fine. But I think wind is a big one, and the colic and reflux, and just making sure you've got all that wind out is so important when they're this little. And cranial osteopaths, love them for sure.
Yeah, it's just like the digestion, isn't it? If they're in pain and then they're kind of put down flat on their backs, which they're supposed to be, it can be really uncomfortable for them, can't it? So
slings are brilliant in the first 4 weeks or so for sure, and moving forwards, but
and that definitely ties. I love a sling. My second particularly always lived in one, and he's the best sleeper now. So I feel like slings are also one of those things that people get worried about, or if they're always in a sling, when are they ever going to stop? Like, am I going to be carrying around a 5-year-old in a sling?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't happen, does it? So I think it's kind of, remembering that, this is not forever. And and it's so hard. And I know, working with the families that I do when they've got much younger children, it's so hard when they're saying, oh, everybody's just saying I need to enjoy this. I should be enjoying this.
Yeah.
And I said, it's more when you look back and you go, I try to appreciate those moments, but not all of it is enjoyable. And that's okay as well.
Yeah. And I think it's subsequent babies. So your first is always the most intense, isn't it? Because you just want to get it all right and you don't really know what it feels like. And then the second one, you're like, oh, I know they'll be fine.
Although sometimes I feel, people come to me with third or fourth children and they're like, I don't understand. Why is this different? Why, what's happened? I've done everything the same. And I think sometimes that's even more stressful, because you've had 2 or 3 that have kind of conformed in a certain way. And then suddenly you've been thrown in with this one that's doing something completely different, and people panic, and I'm like, there's nothing wrong, it's fine, they're different
to what they know. That makes total sense. Another question we had, which is slightly older children, for transitioning from cot to bed, and when you'd recommend doing that, what tips and tricks can you do to make that more successful, or likely to be more successful?
I think you've heard me talk about this many times. Don't do it until they're really, really ready. Like, hold off for as long as possible. I think sort of 3 is a really good age to transition from cot to bed. They're ready, the maturity level's there, you can talk, you can reason, you can have proper conversations, you can do reward charts if you need to, all the things that really can spur a child on to want to stay in bed. We quite often have this really lovely period. So I knew with my eldest, we moved her too early, but she was throwing herself out the cot. So she was throwing herself out, and I don't want, she's going to hurt herself. So we took the sides off, and so she had 3 sides of the cot and her bed, and we had 6 weeks of everything was fine. Then suddenly it was like, I'm out and I'm running around, and we were like, oh god. And we knew she was a bit too young, because she was only I think she was just under 2.5. So we put the side back on, and then she slept again, and she didn't throw herself again until she was older, and we could sit down and make it into a really lovely experience. It's like, yeah, come on, we're going to make this into a big bed. And it wasn't out of desperation, it was time. So I think it's important to know you can be flexible, which I think some people panic about. We've made that decision and we have to stick with it. No, you don't. If it's not working, you may find, if you have done it early, like we had to, because of the fact that she was potentially going to really hurt herself. The fact that we could then put the side back on and her then have another 6 months of lovely sleep in her cot, just shows that it's so important to allow flexibility with things when we need to, because if they're not old enough, it can be quite a scary thing. They've lost that security, they've lost the sides that they love, that allow them to feel safe while they're sleeping. And if we, sometimes we just get a bit carried away and we do it too early, because we're like, oh, it's time for the next stage. And then we realise that actually, no, that was a bit too young. So if everything's going well and sleep is great and there's no throwing themselves out of the cot, hold off, 3-ish is a great aim.
No, that's good, because the person who asked this was actually just about to have a baby, and I think that son was about 2.5, and they were kind of thinking, oh, should I be just getting this done before the baby comes, or like changing stuff? But I think they'll probably take from this that actually just waiting, there's no reason to, just because the baby's coming.
Exactly. And I think almost it's worse to give them that sort of freedom. At this point, that's when they need to be more cocooned. They need that security, because life's about to change for them. So changing something that allows, and also we often talk about them being big, you're going to be a big boy, you're going to be a big brother. And, and that can feel really exciting if they're understanding, and the sort of the variations of understanding at that age is very different. But you know, it's then they're expected to be something else, as well as, you know, having this change in their family. So quite often keeping things the same is really important, and also, you know, allowing them to be young still, and having that cot is providing them that security and safety that they like to feel. And also they need that cot for about 6 months. So actually time wise that works really well.
Yeah, no, that's true. And actually it takes the pressure off you as a parent, doesn't it? You don't have to like do everything before the baby comes. And actually
there's no rules.
No. There's
no rules.
The last question I have on my list was from someone who his little baby, under a year old, I think about 9 months old, is at nursery. And not, you know, at childcare, and not sleeping when they're there, and she's kind of panicking a little bit because obviously that's impacting then home life and things. Do you have any kind of just advice or tips that she could either talk to the nursery about, or I know that's not very much information for you to go on, and she was hoping to come today, but she's at work, so I just wondered if you've ever dealt with that kind of scenario where they're quite young.
A lot. And, you know, I work with people whose children are in multiple different childcare settings sometimes as well. So sleep is all over the place. You know, they might be with grandma, they're at nursery, then they go to a childminder with the other grandparent, and then, you know, so there's always different scenarios that we work with. With nursery, I it's a tricky one, not having all the information. Obviously baby would be needing 2 really good naps a day. My biggest suggestion would be to speak to nursery and just say, look, if all the children are going down for a nap at this time, something isn't working for my child. And I think, you know, perhaps because nursery is so stimulating and it's so full on, and they do have such a great time, but there's not much downtime. So if they're not sleeping on top of that, my suggestion would be that to try and get them down a little bit earlier than they perhaps do the rest of the group. I know that then you run the potential sort of problem of that baby being woken by the others going down to sleep, by assuming they're all in the same room. But I think if they're not sleeping, then you end up in this vicious cycle, and then sleep is more needed. But often stretching them out to fit in with everybody else can then mean that they're overtired, which makes sleep a lot harder. But I'm very happy to speak to this person separately to get more information, to be able to sort of, you know, help them sort of with what they can say to nursery. But I suspect shortening the awake window for that baby at this point would probably be quite helpful if that's an option. But also
I actually think it's a childminder now I think about it, so it might even be more like able to do that.
Yeah. And it does, you know, I don't know how long the baby's been with the childminder, but I always say give it at least 3 months before you start panicking, because it takes that long for everything to even out, and for that child to get used to that environment and person and people.
Applies to all ages, I suppose. That you need that time to settle in and know that environment's okay to kind of fall asleep in and stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
Is there anything that's been coming up in your sessions recently that you wanted to maybe share, or no pressure if there isn't, but I just thought maybe it's quite nice to ask you if there's like frequently asked things.
I think a conversation I've been having a lot with people at the moment, and this just rings true for life as it is for most of us now, where it's busy, you know, we're busy. And we're also, you know, we often feel quite tied to timings, and, you know, we need to be out at this group if we've got a baby at this time, or I'm meeting my friend at that time. And when we feel that way and we need our child to sleep, we quite often are putting quite a lot of pressure on ourselves and our child to sleep at the time that we need to. So one of the big conversations that's been happening a lot recently is about being really present with your child when you're putting them down to sleep. So what I mean by that is when you're having a cuddle initially, so imagining you've gone into the baby's room for a nap, you've shut the curtains, you're holding your baby at this point. I'm kind of talking 6 months on. Well, it also it's relevant for younger children, but in this scenario that I'm discussing, you know, and you give your child a cuddle and it's time for them to go down to sleep, and in your head you're going, right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put you down to sleep, then I'm going to go downstairs, and then I'm going to wash up this, and I'm going to do that, and then we're going to pack the car, and I'm going to get, you know, your child is not getting you at this point. You know, life admin is huge. We know that. The mental load is massive. But if you can just spend 2-3 minutes just being with your child, you know, being really present and really just concentrating on listening to their breathing, you know, singing, maybe humming, and just giving them you in that moment, going down to sleep for that child will be a much calmer, much nicer, much more secure, and sort of that attachment that they've got with you at that moment will provide them with such a huge amount of a boost of like love that will allow them to have a much better quality sleep and to fall asleep quicker, because there won't be that sort of panic feeling of, oh my God, you know, something's going on and the energy feels weird. You know, you've just given them you.
Yeah.
And it's so important. And we're all guilty of it because we are busy. But, you know, I think you're better off kind of just having that time initially before putting them down to sleep where it's just you. You switch off from everything else.
And again, that's like all ages, isn't it? Even with our older ones, like it's something to start doing from really early on. I suppose when they're not speaking as much and doing as much, it can be easy to kind of just, like you say, rush around and tick the box of putting them to sleep. But that's a good thing to set up early on.
Yeah, that's been a big thing. And there was something else that I was thinking about earlier, actually. What was that? I mean, there's so many different topics and subjects. I think if people choose to work with me and we work together for a 2-week window, the first week that we work together is all about your child, as in following your child's lead. You know, this is kind of up to 2.5 when they're still napping, 3 ideally. You know, following your child's lead, sort of recognizing what they need from you. We reset the whole kind of internal body clock. So, you know, sometimes when sleep's a bit all over the place, you know, we kind of picture it a bit like a wiggly line.
Yeah.
In the first week, what we want to do is flatline that line. You know, we want to give them the best amount of sleep possible that they can possibly have. We want them, if they're yawning, if they're rubbing their eyes, I will say to you, right, let's get them down to nap. Don't worry about what time it is on the clock. We're just going to catch them up with sleep. We need them to start being able to build on the routine that they need, not what, you know, the book down the road says. You know, it's you know, let's flatline that sleep so that we can then build on the routine that they need. And that could be, you know, 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon. It could be just an hour in the morning and an hour and a half in the afternoon. Is there still a third nap needed? What happens if they only have a short nap? You know, there's so much that we work on, but it's so important that if we work together, that first week is about just, you know, flatlining, just bringing them back to neutral, reducing any overtiredness, making sure that, you know, we've got the feeds in at the right time. And I think there's so many people that question, you know, how does this work? What happens? And, you know, the second week we then work together on building on that routine. You know, okay, we recognize that this is what they need and when and how, you know, does your child need like a 5-minute cuddle before they go down to sleep? Or are they like, just get off me, just need to sleep, you know, and we're like, no, we have to cuddle. Yeah. So, you know, there's so many different scenarios that happen. And just kind of, but the most important thing I think is recognizing that if you want to try and sort sleep out, it's like we need to kind of bring everything back to neutral. Whether that's with me or just yourself, or it's kind of knowing that we need to catch them up on the sleep that they need before we can even start to expect them to have better sleep.
That's really
that makes sense.
It does. It's a bit like just having a reset, isn't it? Pressing the reset button.
And also not spending hours in a bedroom trying to get a baby to sleep that can't or doesn't want to at that point. You know, we have to recognize, you know, when, what and how, and then we can, you know, work on them understanding what they need to do. And that comes from us.
Thank you so much, Lucy. I will put all of your details below the video. We're also posting these on YouTube now as well, if that's all right. So, we'll pop that on there. And thank you again. And I'm sure we'll see you again in a few months' time.
That'd be lovely. All right.
Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, and you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.